Okay, all right, Leon. Well, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Shane. And yeah, just another good morning to everybody who's maybe just joined recently, and welcome to week 5 of RAC. So we're going to be over the halfway point this morning, and what we're going to be dealing with today exclusively is the audit plan. We're going to go and have a very detailed look at 1705. Now, I want to spend a bit of time with this. We might not even take up the full hour. I don't know. Sometimes I rattle on a little bit much, so we might take up the full hour. But at the end of today, I'm wanting everybody to understand what on earth is happening in this document. It is a massive spreadsheet. It contains 4,500 rows of information. And as I go through it, I'm wanting to give you an understanding, A, of the scope of the document, how much is actually going on in here, but B, what is the automation in RAC? What is being automated for me? What are the options to make my audit flow a whole lot easier? Now, let's just understand firstly the context of where an audit plan fits in an audit. The audit plan is sitting in between, and let me just open up the menu. It's sitting in between my planning, which I've done here, and my execution of audit procedures. So I've gone through and I've raised a whole lot of risks as I've gone through the audit. And we looked at this last week. We did the risk assessment. So we found the risks and we've assessed those risks within the audit. And basically we've now selected specific components and assertions that are going to have increased risk levels, which means that we need to get increased levels of assurance for those items. The audit plan is where we decide how we are going to get the evidence. So let's say, for instance, you've got a significant risk on the completeness of property, plant, and equipment. How am I going to get a very high level of assurance? Am I going to do control testing? Am I going to do analytical procedures? Am I going to be doing tests of detail? And if applicable, what combination of those procedures will I be performing in order to actually go and get the evidence that I need? So that's what the audit plan is all about. And then the answers we decide on the audit plan then filter through to my audit programs to make sure that I go and I actually select and perform the correct procedures when we get to the audit program. And next week, when we look at the audit programs in detail, and again, I might take an entire morning just to go and have a look at those audit programs, you'll see how the audit plan now interacts with my audit program at the end of the day. So that's the place that we are at. We need to make decisions about the nature of the procedures that we're going to be performing. And the first 1705 that I've opened is actually the RAC micro, if you can have a look at the heading at the top. Now, the sheet that opens first is the customization sheet, and all this is actually telling me at the moment is that customization settings are not applicable or necessary for RAC micro. So when I look at customization, we'll look at one of the other sized audits to go and have a look at what this customization is all about. In RAC Micro, and this is one of the other key differences between RAC Micro and the other sized audits, is when I open up 1705, I'm left with basically just a paragraph. And I'm just increasing its size here a little bit so that you can see more clearly, hopefully on your side, what it is saying here. So if you recall, with RAC Micro, one of the assumptions, well, there were a number of assumptions that we made, and there are two important ones. Firstly, we had to say that this was going to be a low-risk audit. That was one of the assumptions for RAC Micro. The second assumption that we needed to make with RAC Micro was that if we raised any risks, those risks would have to be addressed in our risk register with a specific procedure. Therefore, the only thing that should land on my audit plan is low risks for every single assertion of every single component. All right. Now, what this paragraph is telling me is it's confirming this fact that we are supposed to raise procedures, but it is also telling us it would appear as if there are residual risks being transferred to this audit plan. So in other words, I have missed a step in my business risk register. There are risks in my business risk register that are still pulling through to my audit plan. To correct this, so if you're seeing this paragraph, it's quite a long one, and it's just basically telling you you need to go back to your business and fraud RAC to ensure all risks are addressed with procedures, as well as the overall risk assessment in 12.95. Now 12.95, that's reference to the selection of, is the overall risk of this client low to moderate, moderate or significant, and that has to be low in 12.95 for RAC Micro. But the other thing that it's telling me is that I must go back to my business RAC and I need to go and have a look at the risks that I've raised here. So I'm quickly skipping over to that. And I've just gone in preparation, and that's the handout. Sorry, I forgot to mention it earlier. We sent out a handout this morning, and that's just basically a printout of what's on this working paper. So it's just something easier to refer to if you've got that handy as I'm working through. But basically, if I scroll to the right and I have a look at these risks, they're just 10 random risks that I selected. What RAC Micro is telling me is that I actually need to go here and say that we can address all of these risks with a specific procedure. And I need to go and document those procedures, and I need to go and select which cycle I'm going to be performing those procedures on. Now note that because we're in RAC Micro, you've only got statement of financial position and statement of comprehensive income. So there's limited choices here. But I need to complete what I'm doing here. I need to go and assign a procedure to every single risk on this document before I can complete my audit plan in RAC Micro. That's one of the assumptions. So if I now go back to my audit plan, you'll see that this paragraph has changed. Just want to resize it here quickly. And it's now telling me that all assertions of all components have been allocated a low level of risk, and as such will be tested by making use of substantive tests of detail. The exception is journals and related parties, which are automatically assessed as a higher risk due to their nature. So all we're doing here in my audit plan is just a statement to the reviewer that all components have a low risk. That's what we've said, because all our risks are catered for in the business RAC. Therefore, we're just going to be doing substantive tests of detail, but journal entries and related parties will automatically be given a higher level of risk because we have to. We can't assess journals at anything less than significant. So we've still got to do that at a higher level of assurance, but those procedures are already sitting in my journal audit program. And then that's it. From a RAC Micro point of view, I have done my audit plan. I've decided how I'm going to test. And remember, the substantive test of detail is one of the assumptions of RAC Micro as well. It is the assumption that you are only going to do substantive tests of detail before you select RAC Micro. Okay, so that's RAC Micro done and dusted. I don't want to spend any more time on RAC Micro. Lots of other information to get through this morning. I'm now going to switch over to my small entity. Okay, and again, well, now you'll see that there's a lot more information sitting on my customization. But before I get to the customization, I want to talk to you about what's going on in 1705 now. Now, as I said, there are 3.5 to 4,500 rows of information available in this document. And what is basically happening on my audit plan now, for anything, small, medium, or large, is it goes and looks for every single cycle. Here's my statement of financial position. For every single component within that cycle, so I've got property, plant, and equipment, and my next item, is inventory here. The next item is loans to and from shareholders. So it goes through every single cycle, every single component, and then every single assertion in that component. And it is going and doing a summary for me of all the risks that I've pulled through from my business RAC. So let's go and have a look at the first one here. It is my property, plant, and equipment, and it is completus. Now, if you have that handout in front of you, you'll see that the first risk on that document we assigned to property, plant, and equipment. It was called poorly skilled or inexperienced directors. We said it was property, plant, and equipment. Please note that my assessments on that handout have nothing to do with the actual risk. It was just faster for me to tick a few a few risks from 12.65 than to go and write 10 clever examples out. So please don't think that I'm saying that poorly skilled or inexperienced directors should have an impact on property, plant, and equipment. This is just for example purposes. So I've said that it is property, plant, and equipment, and the impact on completeness is 4. So it is significant impact that an error related to this risk could have on completeness. And it also indicated that the likelihood of that risk was a 4. What we basically do when we get to our audit plan is I go and I say, well, the likelihood is 4, the impact on completeness is 4. I say 4 times 4 is 16, and anything from 13 to 16 is a significant risk. And that's what it then goes and puts into this column over here. The level of risk from business RAC is significant. So 4 times 4 is 16, gives me significant. For occurrence and existence, I said for that same risk was a level 3, or the impact, so it was a moderate impact. And 4 times 3 is 12. Anything from 9 to 12 is a moderate risk. So that's what pulls through to my business RAC, from my business RAC to my audit plan. Then for valuation accuracy, it was a 2, so 4 times 2 is 8, and anything from 5 to 8 is a low to moderate risk. And then classification and understandability was a 1. 4 times 1 is 4. Anything from 1 to 4 is a low risk. So these values from my business RAC are pulling through as a direct result of what was included on that business RAC. It's multiplication of the likelihood and impact, and it's assessed a level of assurance according to basically the table that I've just given you. Okay. Now, the overall risk from 12.95 is what's pulling through literally from 12.95. So we said that the overall risk on this client is low. So we've got a significant risk on the left, a low risk on the right. And what RAC now does is it goes and says, what is the higher of these two items? The higher of the two is significant, and it goes and gives a final risk assessment as significant. So the completeness of PPE, we have a significant risk. And the same goes for the other items. Obviously, low is going to be the lowest in all of these cases, so that final risk assessment pulls through. When we get to rights and obligations, on the handout, you will see that there is no risk attached to rights and obligations for this first risk on PPE. So what is pulling through from my business RAC is none. There is no risk according to my business RAC. However, we cannot do no audit work on rights and obligations. We still have to achieve some level of audit assurance. And that is where we then take the overall risk from 12.95 and we say, well, none is less than low, therefore we have to get low assurance for this procedure, or for this assertion of property, plant, and equipment. Now, remembering then, if you have set 12.95 too high, that means that where you've got none, you're going to have significant risk here. For instance, let's say you went and set significant at 12.95, which basically means you're going to have a significant risk on every single assertion of every single component, and you're going to be auditing yourself to death. That's why I say for 12.95, low is probably the most appropriate answer to make in most cases. But if you do feel that there is general discomfort about the client, or there is a lot of pressure on the audit, or you're just starting to feel uncomfortable, then you start pushing it to low to moderate. Be very careful about going to moderate or significant, because the question is, should you even be accepting that client as a client if you need to be starting to do such a high level of assurance for everything? Now, when you're dealing with a public entity or one where there have been significant number of fraud cases, that's where I would say, well, you're not left with much of a choice. Somebody's got to audit these places. It is a high risk, but your fee is probably going to be very, very high because you are taking on a very high risk client. And that would be what you would do in a case like that. So if you really have to, you can, but low or low to moderate generally is what I would do in a case like this. Now, before we get to customization, the process that you would need to follow from this point is the next question is about documenting controls. And you'll see that for significant and moderate, these items are highlighted in yellow. It's a methodology decision. It's a methodology guidance that we're giving. Where we have moderate or significant final risk assessment, we need to go and document a control. We need to do a walkthrough. Now remember, for the fraud risks, we've already documented controls, and that was on my fraud RAC. But I've already documented procedures for those fraud risks, so those are already going to appear on my audit program. Now I have residual risks, and we're saying now not necessarily specifically related to a risk, but specifically related to an assertion of a component. I need to go and document what controls are in place to verify or for management to say that property, plant and equipment is complete. That's what we're documenting here. What control is there over this assertion? It could be that that control governs multiple assertions, so you can say as above or copy and paste the content, but we do want you to go and document that control and verify the implementation with a walkthrough. You then are given the opportunity to decide whether or not you can place reliance on that control. Yes or no. It doesn't mean you are going to test controls. It's just, is it a reliable control? Because if it's not a reliable control, we're saying maybe you need to be considering an internal control exception that you need to raise with management in your management letter. The other items are in green, so you can, if you want, go and document those controls as well. It's an option. We're not going to limit you, especially if you do want to test controls. But for moderate and significant, we're not saying it's necessarily compulsory, but these are going to stay yellow until you say something. So technically, yes, maybe it is compulsory. Moving on, we now need to make a decision on a number of items. Firstly, conclude on whether the operating effectiveness of the internal control will be tested. Now, that cell has a drop-down list, and the options are reliance on controls and the operating effectiveness of controls will be tested. So in other words, you are going to perform tests of control. The second question that arises is, or the second option is that there can be reliance on the effectiveness of the operating controls. However, it's more effective to do substantive testing. So there are controls, we've had a look at them, we've documented it, but even though there are controls and they are effective, we're not going to test them actually. Or we can just say that there will be no reliance on the operating effectiveness of the controls and a detailed substantive approach will be followed. Now, you don't even necessarily need to answer this question. If you leave it blank, the assumption is that you are not going to do control testing. However, if you have documented the controls as you would in the first two, we recommend that you do put something in those cells so that you can basically see what your final decision on these controls that you've documented. Then we need to go and have a look at, will we be performing substantive analytical procedures, and will substantive tests of detail be performed? Okay, so those are the next blocks. So we now need to go and decide yes or no. Sorry, typing the wrong key on my keyboard. Yes, no, whatever the case might be. Next question, will substantive tests of detail be performed? I'm going to say no, yes, I just alternate those questions. And we now need to decide how much assurance are we going to get for each type of procedure that we've selected. Now you will see that This block is highlighted yellow. The reason is I have selected test of controls. Here I've not selected to do tests of controls, so if I hit the drop down, you'll see it's blank. There are no options available. If I click here, I'm given an option of none, low, medium, and high. And you'll see that there's a number value assigned to each one, a 1, 2, and a 3. Now, we have spoken about level of risks, and we've spoken about low, low to moderate, moderate, and significant. So that's 4 different risk levels that are available to me within RAC. And we go and assign a numerical value to each of those risks. So a low is 1, low to moderate is 2, moderate is 3, and significant is 4. Basically, and Protector Partner talks about a risk bucket. So we've gone and we've said on this first item, and we just repopulate that overall risk on the right-hand side here so that you've got easy access. You don't need to scroll left and right to see what my overall risk is. So my overall risk is significant. I need to get 4. And it's a mathematical exercise. I need to get a 4. So I need to go and get a 2 from tests of controls and maybe a 2 from my substantive analytical procedures. Now 2 plus 2 is 4, so significant is 4, so I should now have sufficient procedures. However, you'll see that there is now a bright red cell under planned level of assurance from test of detail. Now the test of detail populates itself. It'll always calculate itself based on what's ever left over after test of controls and analyticals are performed. However, if you can't read it, let me read it for you. It's telling me that for significant risks, some substantive tests of detail must be performed. So please adjust selections accordingly. And you'll see that it's a bright red cell, which is indicating within RAC that there is an error. And the error is that I can't say no, I won't perform substantive test of detail where my overall risk is significant. So I need to go and change this answer. I need to go and say yes, I will perform substantive test of detail, and then I need to go and reduce one of these. I can go and make that low, and you'll see that it automatically goes and populates itself with a low. All right. Next item, I've said I'm only going to do test of detail, so it's automatically populated itself with high, because high is 3, moderate is 3. Next item, I'm saying I'm only going to be doing substantive analytical procedures. Okay, so let's go and put this to a 3. Okay, now a 3 is high, but I only have low to moderate. It's telling me, please reduce the planned assurance from other testing. So I'm actually going and doing too much testing. I need to reduce so that I don't over audit. Go to medium, changes to none under test of detail, and that's correct. I've decided I'm not doing substantive tests of detail. Okay, if I go and I select a 1, the block becomes red again, and it tells me tests of detail may be required, but this has not been indicated as part of, sorry, it's just cutting off there, as part of the audit plan. So it's basically warning me that I don't have enough assurance. So I need to go and either increase, or I need to go and select that I'm going to do test of detail. The item on low, I said I'm doing substantive tests of detail only. It's populated itself. And the next item I've said I'm going to be doing substantive analytical, so I need to go and select low, and it clears that. All right, now that theoretically is the process that is required when you're going through the audit plan. You need to go and have a look at the risk related to every single assertion within every single component, and you need to go and decide, how am I going to test this? Okay. However, this is a very time-consuming process. Before I give you the shortcut, I just want to go back to the handout that I've given you, and I want to go to the second risk that's on the handout, and that specifically relates to depreciation. Just want to scroll down. Depreciation is a little bit lower on this working paper, so please excuse me while I scroll down. Here I get to my depreciation PPE. Now you will see that there is a risk on 1605 related to depreciation. But what we have said on this item is, even though there is a risk, we are going to go and do specific procedures to address these risks. I've got procedure 1 in there, if you've got that handout in front of you. So in other words, from my business RAC, because I'm doing a procedure that specifically caters for that one risk, nothing is pulling through from our business RAC. So that is what is expected when you're doing RAC micro, certainly. You've got to document the risk. So in other words, nothing pulls through from a business RAC into the audit plan. And that's why everything ends up with a low overall risk, because the only risk we're pulling through is from 12.95, which we also have to set to low for RAC micro. Okay, so that's what happens on these items. But now, as I say, this is a very time-consuming process to go and document all of this information. If you have to go through all the assertions of all the components, it does take a bit of time. Okay, so what we have done is we've given you this customization sheet. Let's go and have a look at what this document is telling you. Okay, just going to try and make it a little bit bigger so that you can see a little bit more clearly, hopefully on your side, and read along with me. Now, the purpose of this sheet is to facilitate automatic completion of some aspects of the audit plan by providing standard answers to the level of assurance for each assertion of each component. It is intended to assist in saving time, particularly on smaller audits, and can assist in one of 3 ways. So there are 3 options available to you, and we will do one of each just to give you what the outcome is. Firstly, all procedures defaulted to select only substantive tests of detail and then edited as deemed necessary. So we can go and say, you know what, I'm not going to test controls, I'm not going to do analytical, I'm just doing tests of detail, that's my selection. Okay. The second option is that all procedures for low risk assertions defaulted to substantive test of detail and then edited as deemed necessary. All assertions with higher than low risk then completed in detail, and we'll have a look at how that comes out. And then the third option is that a default response selected for each level of assurance and then edited as deemed necessary. So that gives you an option to go and select a specific response for each option, basically, and we'll have a look at that one as well. It is important to note that these selections do not remove the requirement to consider controls for all moderate or significant risks. An opportunity to selectively hide various lines is therefore provided to assist in speeding up the process. Now, as I said, there's up to 3,500 rows visible. More than likely, you won't generally see more than 500 or 600 of these, maybe 800,000 in very big audits. But that's a lot of rows to work through, even though we are trying to hide as much as we can. And it makes it difficult to find where I actually need to go and focus my work. So the second question that we'll get, and we'll get to that in a moment, is that we just give you the option to go and hide all the not applicable stuff. So if something is sorted and the correct answers are in place, we just hide it so that you don't need to worry about it. We'll come back to that. Firstly, let's go and look at the customization options. Okay. Now, this is a small audit, RAC small, so the likelihood is that you're probably not going to test controls on this client at all. It's just not going to be cost effective for your audit to test controls. And quite frankly, I think very often this is the selection that a lot of people are going to make on their audits, is that they just rather go and do the substantive testing after year end, get the work done, finish the audit, and not go and have a look at the controls, because sometimes, especially in small audits, you're going to end up finding that the control has not been implemented appropriately throughout the year. Its design is nice and everything, but you're going to find those exceptions, and then you have to go and do a lot more substantive testing anyway. So the first option is, I am going to go and do substantive tests of detail only. Let's go and click on that option. Nothing appears to change here. But let's go and look at 1705 now. Okay, now properly planned equipment we still did manually, so I'm going to skip over the properly planned equipment. I'm going to move to inventory, and let's go and have a look at the answers that are given in inventory. Look at what's happened. All of these cells are already completed for you. All right, it's telling me that there's no reliance on controls, that there will be no substantive analytical procedures, and we will just do substantive test of detail, and whatever that overall risk is It's already selected for you in my test of detail. Now, because we have gone and edited property, plant and equipment already, we've basically gone and overridden the selections that we've made, we've overridden the automation, I should say. So this has not changed. Because I've gone and selected answers here, this has not changed, and what I decided originally was still in place. And you can still come back and say, but for the completeness of inventory, I do want to rely on controls, and therefore I will do a low level of assurance on controls. So you can override the automation specifically if you want to, but look at all of this. There's a lot of stuff. I don't know how much of it you can see as I scroll, but there is a lot of information here that has been completed for you, except for journals and related parties and contingent liabilities. Those we still want. Well, let me rephrase that. They have been selected that you're going to be doing only substantive test of detail, but there's other information to complete here. You'll see that there are still yellow cells in place. And that's what the second question on this work, on the customization sheet, is all about. Why you don't want to scroll through all of this information to try and find where the yellow cells are. I want to identify where is there a problem. Let me go to my customization sheet. I'm going to say now, hide all lines where there are outstanding issues, or there are not outstanding issues. Go and say yes here. When I go back to 1705, only the yellow cells are visible. Everything else is grayed out. So there is loans to and from shareholders, but there are no problems. Borrowings, here's a significant and a moderate risk. Let's go and document the information. So I would need to go and document, sorry, my caps lock is on, document that walkthrough. Can I place reliance? Yes. And as I've documented that, the line has disappeared because I've now addressed everything that's outstanding in borrowings. Okay, let's go and, on their completeness, let's go and document for occurrence and existence. Can I rely on the control? Yes, and it's gone. You've completed what needed to be included in that line. So all my decisions are made. I would just then need to go and do this to all the yellow items. And at the end of the day, what we're looking for is for this red block at the top to clear. We don't want to see anything in there. In fact, I can't recall now if it hides or if the color changes. I haven't looked at it for a while, I must admit. But something's going to change there, and then you know that you've dealt with all outstanding issues. Okay, so that is what we want at the end of the day. We want to have an approach in our audit plan to be able to go and do the audit work, and the customization is here to assist with that. I'm now going to go and have a look at one of the other options. So let's go and look at my RAC medium. And for RAC medium, all the exact same risks are in place as per the handout. So everything is the same as my handout, but I'm now going to select the second customization option, which is significant tests of detail procedures only for low risk items. So if I select that item, and I'm going to also go and hide the unnecessary rows, or in fact, let me leave that as no for now. Let's go and have a look at property, plant and equipment. Now, as you remember, we had a significant moderate, low to moderate and low. Let's go and have a look. The only lines that are completed are here, sorry, it's just jumping around a bit, is here where we have low. It's been completed for me there. So that has been done. It's a low risk. I'm going to do substantive tests of detail. So this, I think, is going to be the second most popular answer when you're doing audits. And this is basically what RAC Micro does, is everything is low, and we've said we're going to do substantive test of detail. So this is basically what is sitting in the background in RAC Micro. Okay. If I go to my customization, let me go and hide all the unnecessary rows for myself. You'll see all those lows are gone, and I'm just left with a significant, moderate, and low to moderate risks. And I need to go and complete the items. Let's go and do it for PPE quickly. So I would need to document the control. I would need to verify the walkthrough. yes, I can place reliance on the controls. I'm going to perform control testing. I will perform analyticals, and I will perform substantive test of detail. And there you go. Problem solved. Okay. All right, so that's the process. Need to go through in the audit plan. If we've said that low only, then everything else low to moderate, moderate and significant, we need to go and specify how we're going to test those items. Now I'm going to switch over to my RAC large, and we're going to look at the last customization option. Obviously the fourth option here is no customization. You know what that looks like, and yes, it's going to take a long time. Let's go and look at customization per risk level, and what we then need to do is fill in this table below. This is, at the end of the day, how I'm going to address every level of assurance, because what we said is that there's going to be a default response for every level of assurance, and then we can edit it as we deem necessary. So I need to go and say, when I have a significant risk, I will test controls, I will test analyticals, and I want to get a 1 from controls, and I want to get a 1 from analyticals, and therefore I need to get a 2 from substantive test of detail, remaining assurance none. You need to make sure that you get to a none in the last block. Moderate, I want to test controls, I will not do analyticals, and I want to perform tests of detail, but for these I'm going to get level 2 from test of control and then 1 from substantive test of detail. Low to moderate, I'm not going to test controls, but I will test analyticals and test of detail. Put a 1 in for each of those. And then lastly for low, you can't test controls. I'll come back to that in a moment. I won't test analyticals. I will test substantive tests of detail, and we go and put a 1 in. Okay, now just a bit of theory as to why this block is white and that block is white. When it's significant, we addressed that already. You have got to do some tests of detail when you've got a significant risk. You cannot only perform tests of controls. You have always got to get some substantive evidence. It could be analytical or it could be tests of detail. It doesn't matter what type of substantive testing you do, but you can't only do tests of control. That's why for low, because you only need to get a 1, you can't get a 1 from controls, because then you're going to get a 1 from something else as well, and you're actually getting 2. So that's why that is not applicable, and that is always yes. Okay, let's go and have a look at what has happened to my PPE. Scroll a little bit to the right, and there you go. Significant risk, I'm doing controls and analyticals and detail. For moderate, I'm doing controls and detail. For low to moderate, the next 3 items. Now what I want to just point out is when I set this up on 12.95, please note that I've selected here low to moderate for everything. So there are actually no low risks in this client because of that selection. So all of them I'm doing some analytical, some test of detail. So let's show you why this risk level is different, why we're not sitting with a low on this 4th item. Okay. So that is the customization. Once again, I would go and say hide everything without outstanding issues. What am I left with? I need to go and document the controls for my moderate and significant so that I can hide these cells, and that then I can move on in my audit plan. Okay. All right, folks, that is 1705. A lot of detail in there and a lot of audit theory happening in the background, but you will see from the customization that we are trying to make this process as easy as possible to follow. The fact of the matter is that it is a requirement for you to document your audit plan. You have got to go and document how you're going to test the risk in every single case, and we just feel that with the audit plan update that we did, I can't remember when it was last year, but it was a later improvement to RAC. We could create a situation where we are making life as easy as possible for you as the user on the one hand, by maximizing the automation, and that's what RAC brings you, is a lot of automation. But at the end of the day, you're still left with a very comprehensive document to put in your file to prove that you have gone and considered for every single assertion of every single component how you're going to go and test that. As I say, the reality, many of you are just going to say tests of detail only. I'm not going to worry about controls, and that's not wrong. It's not a wrong answer. You can go and do that. But if that is your decision, why spend 2 hours running through this entire working paper and going and documenting everything? That's what the customization is for. We're just trying to make that as easy as possible to complete.